Around mid-morning, I sat across from my manager, Rick, while he tapped a pen against a glossy conference table like a judge waiting to sentence someone. Rick leaned back in his chair with a tight smile. "Your KPIs are slipping again," he said. I nodded slowly while looking at the spreadsheet he pushed toward me. The numbers were real, but the story behind them was not. I worked as a client systems analyst at a fast-growing tech firm called Lattice Harbor Solutions. My role involved handling enterprise clients who demanded quick fixes and faster answers. Tickets came in all day: system integrations, outage triage, emergency configuration requests. It was a constant stream. Rick slid another document across the table. "A performance improvement plan," he said. "We need you to step it up." The phrase was corporate theater. A performance improvement plan rarely improved anything except the company legal position when they wanted someone gone. I took the document without reacting. "Understood," I said. Inside my head, something very calm woke up. I had learned something important about corporate environments. Emotion lost. Documentation won. So I began documenting. Every single ticket. Every request. Every escalation. Every late-night message from Rick asking me to solve something outside my role. Our support platform logged everything already, but most employees never studied the patterns. I did. Around the early morning hours each day, I exported the ticket assignments into a spreadsheet. I categorized them: urgent escalations, standard client support, back-end engineering coordination, emergency recovery. I also logged the assignments given to my coworkers. 3 weeks later, a pattern emerged so obvious it felt insulting. My workload was nearly double everyone else, sometimes more. On certain days, I handled nearly 60% of the entire team queue. I sat at my apartment kitchen table staring at the numbers while sipping coffee that had gone cold. Rick had not been measuring performance. He had been measuring tolerance. How much work someone accepted before they pushed back. Many employees burned out and quietly quit. Rick would simply replace them. But numbers have a strange power in corporate rooms, especially numbers that managers do not expect to see. I expanded my spreadsheet into a clean visual dashboard. Ticket distribution, resolution times, escalation rates, client satisfaction scores. Mine were the highest on the team. My workload was the largest. The conclusion was simple enough for a boardroom to understand. I was outperforming everyone while carrying the heaviest load. Around late afternoon the following week, Rick called another meeting. He wore the expression managers use when they expect obedience. "I hope you use this improvement period wisely," he said. I opened my laptop. "Oh, I did," I replied. I rotated the screen toward him. The graphs were colorful and impossible to ignore. Rick frowned. "What is this?" "A record of work distribution across the team," I said calmly. He leaned closer. Silence filled the room as he scanned the charts. His face tightened. I pointed to a column. "Over the last month, I handled 182 client tickets. The next highest employee handled 96. Rick shifted in his chair. "I also maintain the fastest resolution rate," I continued, "and the highest satisfaction scores." The silence grew heavier. Managers do not enjoy mirrors, especially numerical ones. Rick closed the laptop slowly. Then he smiled. But the smile carried teeth. "Interesting," he said. I had the strange feeling the conversation was about to become far less professional and far more revealing. I was right. Rick leaned forward and folded his hands. "I am glad you enjoy spreadsheets," he said, "but performance here is about attitude." That was when I realized something important. Rick had never planned to be fair. He had planned something else entirely. And I was about to discover what it was. Part 2. Rick stared at the graphs for another moment before pushing my laptop aside like it offended him. "You are missing the bigger picture," he said. I remained calm. The bigger picture shows that I am carrying the largest workload on the team. Rick exhaled loudly. This is exactly the problem. You focus on details instead of leadership. Corporate phrases are fascinating. They often mean the opposite of their literal meaning. Leadership often meant obedience. Details often meant evidence. Rick leaned back and folded his arms. I have an opportunity for you, he said. The tone was strange. Not supportive. Not even neutral. I'm more like someone announcing a chore. My nephew recently graduated from MIT, Rick continued proudly. Brilliant kid. I said nothing. Rick nodded toward my laptop. You are going to train him. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. I tilted my head. Train him in what exactly? In your role, Rick said casually. The room went very quiet. I felt something shift in my chest, but it was not panic. It was clarity. Rick had never been interested in my performance, and he had been clearing space. Effective immediately, he added. I folded my hands on the table. And the performance improvement plan? Rick waved a dismissive hand. That depends on how cooperative you are. So there it was. Nepotism wrapped inside corporate language. Rick leaned closer, lowering his voice. You should be grateful for the chance to learn leadership from this. Sometimes talented people need to make room for even greater talent. The arrogance would have been impressive if it were not so predictable. I studied him for a moment. During the years I had worked here, recruiters had filled my professional inbox. Messages from other firms, startups, consultancies, cloud infrastructure companies. They liked engineers who solved enterprise problems quickly. I had ignored most of them because stability mattered. But stability only exists when leadership respects competence. Rick tapped the table impatiently. So we are clear? I nodded slowly. Oh yes, I said. Rick smiled. Good news rarely begins with that phrase. Around early evening, I returned to my desk and opened my personal finance dashboard. 5 years earlier, when Lattice Harbor Solutions recruited me, they offered a $30,000 signing bonus. Many employees used those bonuses on furniture or travel. I invested mine. Index funds, dividend reinvestment, quiet compound growth. The account now held $85,000, an emergency fund that gave me something rare in corporate life: freedom. I looked around the office floor. Rows of employees typing while pretending everything here made sense. Rick walked past my desk while talking loudly on his phone. He laughed. Confidence radiated from him. He believed he controlled the outcome. I closed my laptop. And then I stood and walked toward his office. Rick looked surprised when I knocked. Yes? I stepped inside. I have an update, I said. Rick leaned back in his chair. Good. I hope it is about being a team player. I smiled. In a way it is. Rick gestured impatiently. Go ahead. I placed a folded paper on his desk. My 2-week notice, I said calmly. Rick blinked. The expression on his face looked like someone had switched off gravity. You are quitting? Effective immediately, I am starting my notice period, I replied. Rick laughed sharply. You think you can just walk out? I met his eyes. You mentioned your nephew is brilliant. I am sure he will enjoy handling my workload. The silence that followed was very satisfying. Rick had expected obedience. What he received instead was arithmetic. And arithmetic is very difficult to argue with. Part 3. Rick stared at my resignation letter like it was written in another language. You are making a mistake, he said slowly. I shook my head. I believe the mistake already happened. Rick leaned forward, his voice sharpening. You signed an employment agreement. Yes, I replied calmly, and that agreement requires 2 weeks' notice, which I have provided. Rick opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder as if paperwork might restore his authority. You cannot abandon responsibilities. I am not abandoning anything, I said. I will continue resolving assigned tickets during the notice period. Rick rubbed his temples. And the training? I smiled politely. I will gladly document processes. Documentation is a valuable asset. He glared. You will train my nephew. The certainty in his voice almost made me laugh. Rick believed titles created power. He had forgotten something important. Competence created mobility. I folded my hands. Your nephew is a graduate of a prestigious institute. I am sure he will learn quickly. Rick slammed the folder shut. You think recruiters are waiting outside the door? That question made me pause, because the answer was amusing. I opened my phone and turned the screen toward him. My professional inbox displayed several unread messages. Recruiters, hiring directors, consulting firms. One message had arrived earlier that week. A cloud infrastructure startup called Apex Circuit Systems wanted to discuss a senior client reliability position. Rick stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. You have been job hunting. I have been responding to interest, I corrected. Rick leaned back slowly. Anger had replaced confidence. You know something, he said quietly. What is that? You are not as irreplaceable as you think. I nodded. You are correct. Rick looked surprised. No employee is irreplaceable. I paused before continuing, but productivity gaps are measurable. Rick did not respond. Around late afternoon, I returned to my desk and began organizing documentation, ticket workflows, client escalation protocols, system recovery procedures, years of quiet expertise translated into structured guides. My coworkers began whispering after noticing the resignation email. One analyst rolled her chair beside mine. Is it true? I nodded. She lowered her voice. Rick is panicking. That made sense. The team workload dashboard I created earlier had not disappeared. Human Resources had requested a copy. Apparently, they enjoyed numbers as well. Corporate risk departments tend to dislike nepotism once it becomes visible, especially when documentation exists. Around the early evening hours, Rick called an emergency team meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room. Rick forced a smile. As some of you know, he said stiffly, our team will be welcoming new talent soon. He glanced in my direction. My nephew will join the department. Several employees exchanged looks. Rick continued. In the meantime, we will redistribute workloads. The phrase sounded noble, except everyone in the room already knew what the numbers showed. My workload represented a large portion of the department. Rick ended the meeting quickly. As employees filed out, one of the senior engineers stopped beside me. You handled most of the enterprise queue, he said quietly. I shrugged. Numbers are stubborn. He nodded thoughtfully. Around the following morning, I received a message from Human Resources requesting a conversation. Documentation travels quickly inside corporate systems, especially when it reveals uncomfortable truths. Rick had tried to push me out. Instead, he had opened a door. And once doors open inside a corporation, they rarely close quietly. Part 4. Around mid-morning, I sat inside a small conference room with a representative from Human Resources named Carla. Carla spoke in the careful tone professionals use when they sense liability. We reviewed the workload data you submitted, she said. I nodded. The spreadsheet sat printed in front of her. Color-coded charts made the imbalance obvious. These numbers appear accurate, Carla continued. They are exported directly from our ticket system, I replied. Carla adjusted her glasses. And you were placed on a performance improvement plan during this period? Yes. She wrote several notes. Corporate investigations are often quiet, but they move quickly when documentation exists. Carla folded her hands. I also understand you submitted a resignation. I did. Carla studied me. May I ask why? That question deserved an honest answer. Because leverage matters. Carla raised an eyebrow. I continued calmly. My compensation has remained stable while my workload increased significantly. I documented the difference. Carla nodded slowly. Financial awareness tends to confuse companies that expect emotional reactions. I also maintain sufficient savings, I added. Carla glanced up. That gives you flexibility. Correct. Around the early afternoon hours, the conversation ended. As I left the room, I noticed Rick pacing near the hallway window. He looked like someone who had misplaced control. He approached quickly. What did you tell them? The truth, I replied. Rick lowered his voice. You are creating unnecessary problems. I smiled faintly. Transparency often does that. Rick exhaled sharply. You think another company will treat you better? I considered the question. Companies respond to leverage, I said. The trick is having some. Rick scoffed. You are young. You do not understand corporate reality. That sentence almost made me laugh. Corporate reality was exactly what I understood. My emergency fund had grown from $30,000 to $85,000 through disciplined investing. Index funds, dividend reinvestment, compounding returns. That money represented something powerful. Time. Time allows people to make decisions without fear. Around late afternoon, I received a message from Apex Circuit Systems asking if I was available for a discussion. I scheduled the call. Rick watched from across the office while I packed small personal items into a box. A plant, a framed certificate, a notebook filled with technical diagrams. My coworkers moved carefully around the floor, sensing tension. Rick approached one final time. You are leaving a stable job, he said. I met his eyes. Stability without respect is temporary. Rick shook his head. My nephew arrives soon. You could have learned something? I smiled. I believe he will learn a great deal. Rick frowned. About what? Workload distribution, I said calmly. The expression on his face suggested the lesson had already begun, and I had not even left yet. Part 5. Around the early morning of my final week at Lattice Harbor Solutions, the office atmosphere felt strangely quiet. Rick avoided my desk. Human Resources had scheduled several private meetings across the department. Documentation tends to circulate once investigations begin. I continued closing support tickets and updating process guides. Professional exits are strategic. Burning bridges rarely benefits anyone, but clear documentation often does. Around late morning, Nephew arrived. His name was Dylan. Tall, confident, and wearing the expression of someone who believed opportunity had simply appeared. Rick introduced him loudly across the office. This is Dylan, MIT graduate. Dylan smiled and shook hands. Then Rick gestured toward me. She will help you understand the system. I nodded politely. Dylan pulled up a chair beside my desk. So, what exactly do you do here? The question carried genuine curiosity. I opened the ticket dashboard. Enterprise client recovery and system integration support. Dylan leaned closer. The queue displayed dozens of active requests, escalations, infrastructure conflicts, emergency patches. His eyebrows rose slowly. You handle all of this? Most of it, I said. Dylan scrolled through the queue. Silence grew. How many engineers are on this team? 5. He glanced at the workload column. My name filled a large portion of the list. Dylan looked confused. This seems uneven. I smiled faintly. Numbers often are. Rick watched from his office doorway. Confidence had faded from his posture. By early afternoon, Dylan had reviewed several escalation cases. His enthusiasm had softened into concentration. These systems are complicated, he admitted. They are, I agreed. Dylan looked back at the queue. You resolved these clients quickly. Experience helps. Rick stepped forward impatiently. You will pick it up. Dylan nodded uncertainly. I closed my laptop. My documentation folder contains recovery guides and client workflows, I said. Dylan accepted the folder. Rick crossed his arms. Your notice ends soon. Yes, I replied. Rick forced a smile. Good luck. I gathered my box and walked toward the exit. Around the late afternoon sunlight spilled through the lobby windows. My phone vibrated. Apex Circuit Systems had sent a formal offer. Senior Client Reliability Engineer, higher salary, equity participation, remote flexibility. I stepped outside and breathed in the cool air. Inside that building, Rick was explaining ticket queues to his brilliant nephew. Numbers would continue telling their story. Workloads would remain measurable. And some lessons inside corporate life arrive with surprising clarity, especially when someone decides to stop tolerating arithmetic that never made sense in the first place.